inviting me, President Steve. Just wanted to start off with the scripture from Ecclesiastes 3:4. You're all familiar with. There's a time for everything and a season for every purpose under heaven, a time to laugh. And I appreciate that you bring a lot of joy and laughter. And I enjoy attending these meetings because, in part, because of the optimism and the laughter that I get from these meetings. There's been a lot of depression and difficulty with the COVID season, but there's been some good things too. For example, I heard of a man who's been washing his hands so much, he says now, that he found the answers to his 8th grade math test, which is just great, right? I try to tell my clients it's great because now they get to work from home, but they complain that they're living at work. You know, it's all in the perspective. But it's hard being at home so much. I asked my wife, said, is my chin getting fat? And of course she responds, which chin? And that didn't really help, right? So I've got all these New Year's resolutions and stuff. And at the start of the new year, I said, you know what? I'm going to lose 15 pounds this year. And great, I've only got 25 left to go. So I don't know how I'm doing, but you know, I do have 9 kids, and we're crammed into our house. It's a nice house, but you know, they're home a lot. And the teenager, he's saying, you know, people are in my personal space. Mom, you're getting in my personal space. Good thing I'm not the mom, or I would have said, you came out of my personal space, so I guess we're even, right? But she's wonderful. She says, no. You know, I say to her, honey, yes, would you be mad at me if I told you I spilled grease on the oven? And she said, honey, I won't be mad at you if you cleaned it up. I just said, well, I'd rather you be mad at me. Of course, I ended up cleaning up the grease, of course. And then to make up to the wife, you've got to do nice things. Like I'm thinking, okay, now I've got to buy her diamonds. But she tells me I'd rather have a car. Now tell me, where am I going to find a fake car? It just doesn't add up, right? But I do adore her. The motto of my life is, if at first you don't succeed, just do it the way your wife told you to. And life goes much better. And our family, our setup is I make the living and she makes the life worth living. I'm excited to grow old together with her. Of course, these young people sometimes don't appreciate the elderly. Like my children tell Grandpa, you're so old. When you were growing up, the rainbows were black and white. It's it's a little different. But, you know, some people have it all right. Like there was an elderly, wealthy woman, and she starts dating this really young guy. And so her friends ask her, so how did you do it? Did you lie about your age? And this wealthy lady says, yeah, I told him I was in my 90s. So I guess that was her trick. But it worked out better for another lady. She goes to the class reunion and she sees her high school sweetheart. They fall in love. The next morning, he calls her up and says, you know, I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of old here, but I know I proposed to you last night, but I can't remember what you said. And she said, oh, I said yes, but I'm glad you called. I couldn't remember who proposed to me. So, you know, there's new challenges that come in life as you get older. On a more serious note, I do very much respect my great grandma, Manoa, who lived a very difficult life. I come from several generations of pioneer ancestors who lived difficult frontier lives of hardship. And my grandma Manoa buried several of her children and her husband eventually, going through some of the hardships of the pioneer life. And she always kept the bright and positive outlook. And one thing that that was asked of her, how do you keep such a good outlook on life? She said, I spend half my time counting my blessings, the other half of my time thanking the Lord for them, so I have no time left to complain. So that's my, hopefully we can remember those words that I keep in my mind regularly. So on to the next part of my presentation. Let's talk taxes. There are a lot of new tax changes that have been going on, so I'm just going to hit some of them here. I want to talk particularly the tax principles. We have a tax system that does seem to punish people for making money and does seem to reward people who aren't making as much money, which it kind of reminds me of Viktor Frankl's book, where he said, if we have a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, we should have a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. But the IRS is increasing their funding. So it creates an interesting dichotomy in our country, because we have right now about 38,000 different, excuse me, correct that number, about 82,000 IRS agents, and there are about 82,000 different tax preparers in our country. And so they've created a situation where the IRS has a sword and a shield, both paid by the same taxpayer. And it's incredibly inefficient the way our system is working right now. And as informed citizens, we should work towards a tax system where anyone can prepare their taxes, making it flatter, more fair, and less loopholes and special deals for interest groups that lobby the best. Right now, our current tax code encompasses over 2,600 pages, and it's supplemented by another 60,000 additional pages of regulations, tax rulings, references to annotations, court cases. It's almost beyond comprehension how large and grotesque our tax code has been built. But the other way to look at it is, you think about it, Section 61 of the Internal Revenue Code tells you what's taxed. All income from whatever source derived. Everything else tells you how to get out of it. So there's another perspective you could take. The most important word in the tax code is reasonable. You want to make sure that everything that you do, my real estate friends say the key word is, for real estate agents, is location, location, location. With taxes, it's document, document, document. And the longer you have the documentation on your file, the more authoritative and authentic it can become. So make sure you're well documented for any tax positions you take. I have a lot of clients that will find things on the internet, different structures, different strategies, different ideas. I have to remind them, never make a bad business decision to get a good tax result. Number one is to make good business decisions. I mean, the employment opportunity credit, zone credit, that's a good example where you can defer capital gains and invest in underserved areas. We have a few of them here in Lane County, one of them here in Glenwood near my office. People at first got really excited about using this empowerment opportunity zone credits, but they look at it and say, well, are those really good investments in the first place? And most of the tax strategies that I have to talk people through, if it's pretty unusual, you want to be careful that it's a good business decision. And you could also need to be careful because the IRS looks at substance over form. In other words, if you set up trusts or entities and structure your taxes in a way that has no practical or business purpose, it has simply a tax avoidance, tax evasion purpose, then the IRS can unravel that and make you pay the penalties and interest on that too, using the substance over form document. And the last principle I leave with my clients is, in finding deductions and opportunities and loopholes, remember, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. Step lightly. So those are kind of the tax principles I talk to my clients about. And from a big picture, there's basically two tax worlds that people live in. One is if you are a business owner. So if you're a business owner, you kind of have a Pandora's box of opportunities. There's usually eight favorite kind of deductions that you want to work with, like using electronics and buying supplies, hiring your kids or grandkids, using a retirement plan to get deductions, health insurance deductions, home office strategies, things like business travel and vehicle deductions. There's a lot of area where there's a gray area where you can work the IRS in those areas if you're a business owner. Now, if you're not a business owner, you'll have the simple tax return, maybe your wages, your pensions. You'll have home mortgage deductions, some charitable contributions. So really, if you're in that category, you should be focusing on getting your tax bill to zero. When I say not, and because you're not getting a refund, that means the government didn't hold on to your money, but because you didn't owe money, you don't have to pay penalties and interest, hopefully. Also, if you're in that category, there's a lot of talk right now about rollover strategies. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2018, that is going to be undone in 2026. So people who have a Roth IRA will be able to pull their money out tax-free when they'll pull their money out tax-free in retirement if they have a Roth. And the IRA, of course, you pay it, you take the money out after tax. Really, the only consideration that goes into this equation of whether you should be putting money into a Roth or whether you should be putting money into an IRA is what is the tax rate going to be later on. So you want to look at what kind of deductions you have, what your income is going to look like at that time. Other people will argue, well, shouldn't I look at the rate of growth in the stock market, or shouldn't I look at the other variables on the tax return to decide whether I should have an IRA or a Roth IRA? The reality is it comes out the same. In other words, to use simple numbers, if you earn $100 and you're trying to decide whether to put it into a Roth or into a traditional IRA, and you're in, to use a simple number, a 20% tax bracket, if you put it into a Roth IRA, you only get $80 after tax when you earn that money, because you paid 20% tax bracket, the $20, so you get $80. You invest that $80 into the stock market, and let's say it grows 10 times when you retire. So now it's worth $800 when you retire. And it's in a Roth, you get that full $800 out. Conversely, if you put the money into a traditional IRA, you get to put the full $100 in. And if it grows 10 times over before you retire, like the Roth did, then now you've got $1,000 in your traditional IRA account. If you pull the money out and you're in the same tax bracket, 20% tax bracket, you get $800 in your pocket. You come out the same. So again, with the Trump tax cuts being repealed in 2026, you want to pay attention to that, see if you should be putting money into a Roth IRA. With the amount of debt our government is incurring, I don't like to be a pessimist, but I am concerned that tax rates are going to be going up in the future. With the mentality of many of our millennials who will be running the country as the baby boomers, in some ways, and some of the greatest generation be leaving this life, we may have some issues in the future with tax rates going up. But we do know that the 22% tax bracket, those earning up to around 171,000 is going to go up to 25%, and that 12% bracket that we love is going to be going up to 15%. So we can predict what's going to happen in the future on the tax rate. So you want to talk to your CPA about doing Roth conversions. Let's talk a little bit about the new COVID rules, the PPP. There was 2 rounds of PPP that was paid out. You can be reimbursed and deduct 2.5 times your monthly payroll. It's limited to your operating expenses. If you're getting a loan of less than $150,000, there's a short form you could use. That PPP2, the deadline for applications has been extended to May 31st. So if you're a business owner, make sure you get that in. The biggest difference was, though, with round 1 of PPP, all you had to show is that your business was impacted. And it was kind of a free-for-all for anybody to be able to apply. PPP round 2, you had to show a 25% decrease in revenue year over year. As long as you were under 300 employees, then you were had access to the PPP2. And the loans was up to $2 million. So of the 7 sort of grant or major COVID programs that came out, number 2 was the EIDL advance, as it's called. It was basically $10,000 of free money if you could show a 30% reduction in your revenue. The 3rd program was called the Employer Tax Credit. The 2020 version of it wasn't very lucrative. The 2021 version was. The 2021 version allows for $28,000 per employee. whereas the 2020 version only allowed for 5,000 per employee. 2020 version, you had to have 50% reduction in revenue. And for 2021, you just need to show a 20% reduction in revenue from 2019 to 2020. And now they were allowing people to take the employee retention tax credit, even if you had taken the PPP. The fourth program that they rolled out was commercial rent relief. If any of you have commercial rental properties, that's important. If your tenants were, they had to have been, your tenant had to have been current on March 1st, 2020. You can get 100% of your rent compensated up to $100,000 per tenant for missing rent from March 1st, 2020 until February 28, 2021. So a lot of opportunity there for commercial landlords to recover their losses. And then even for residential landlords, there's the landlord compensation fund. So 80% of your missing rent may be recovered if the tenant declares financial hardship. So if you know, those of you, if I assume many of you have rental properties, if you had a client flake out on you or a tenant flake out on you, you certainly want to look into that. But you are going to have to forgive at least 20% of that that is going to be totally uncollectible. The sixth opportunity is a shuttered venue operations grant. Holt Center, Shed Institute, a lot of these organizations, they were allowed to recover 45% of their drop in revenue if they could show at least a 25% drop in revenue from 2019 to 2020. And then the seventh one is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. So if you had a restaurant and it showed a decline in revenue beyond what was covered by the PPP that we talked about earlier, then you are allowed to use that money to cover some operational costs. There's been a lot of talk about how the standard deduction has gotten so high, it's up to $24,000 for couples, that only a fraction of my clients that used to itemize, well, I shouldn't say a fraction, but overall a fraction of America's taxpayers that used to itemize are now itemizing, because you either take the standard deduction or the itemized deduction. And with the standard deduction being at $24,000, the itemized deduction isn't helpful for a lot of people. There's 4 sections on the itemized deduction. The top is your medical expenses, if it's more than 7.5% of your income, if you're over the age bracket. Number 2 are taxes you paid. They maxed that out at $10,000. So really that $10,000 cap keeps you from, I mean, you have clients, you know, paying $40,000, $50,000 in state taxes and the real estate taxes and on, but it was getting disallowed anyways because of the alternative minimum tax. Anyway, the point is, with that being capped at $10,000, it was harder to reach the standard deduction of $24,000. And then the third section is the mortgage interest. And then the fourth section is the charitable contributions. So a lot of people are complaining, well, gee, now my charity doesn't do me any good because I'm not even getting close to that $24,000. I maybe give $10,000 to charity. I have $10,000 in taxes, and you know, but after the threshold, maybe only get up to $4,000 in medical, or you know, maybe a couple $4,000 instead in the mortgage interest. And the fair point, but remember, and this is the thing that gets omitted from a lot of conversations, is Oregon will give you the charitable contributions, will give you all your itemized deductions. And Oregon's standard deduction is still at $4,350 for married couples. So even though federal doesn't do you any good to give to the charity, Oregon does give you that tax deduction. And there is a $300 on the federal, a $300 pre-AGI or above the line, as they call it, deduction for giving to charity. So even if you're not itemizing, just make sure you at least report $300 worth of charity every year, whether you're dropping off a couple bags of goods at the Goodwill or whatever. Grab that slip, take a picture, document why it's worth $300, and take the deduction on your tax return. But yeah, let's be clear. Oregon has the second worst taxes in America for income and estate taxes. Your trust. So you should have a will set up so that the the first of you to die will have $1 million go through their estate and pass out to the beneficiary, or go directly to the surviving spouse. And then, but the way you want it set up is so that your trust will have $1 million in it, and the surviving spouse can use that income for her health, education, maintenance, welfare, support. And then that $1 million in that trust, it'll be called a bypass, a credit shelter trust, has a variety of names, but it's an irrevocable trust that can be drawn from by the surviving spouse. But the point is, it is not included in the estate of when the second spouse dies. So in other words, the first spouse has $1 million that they show on their tax return or on their estate return. Says, look, I had $1 million, but Oregon has $1 million threshold, no tax. I'm putting it into the will calls for it to be put into the trust. Now the second spouse gets, let's say you're worth 2 million, let's say you're worth 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, whatever. The other spouse gets all of the rest of the money. Now remember, the federal government and every state in America has an unlimited marital exclusion. In other words, you can transfer as much money to your surviving spouse as you want without it being taxed. So let's say, to make a good scenario, the $1 million goes into the trust, but your whole estate was worth 1.8 million. That's a fairly common number. So the surviving spouse gets the 800,000 directly to her. That money grows over the next 10 years of her life until she passes away. And so that's at $1 million. So $1 million in the trust, not part of the estate, $1 million in her own name, part of her estate, but she gets the $1 million exclusion too. Voila, you excluded $2 million from the estate. So Oregon does not have what the federal government has, which is called portability, which basically all you have to do is when the first spouse dies, check a box, and that transfers the marital exclusion from the first spouse to the second spouse. But federal, it's not really needed right now. The estate exclusion is around 11 million. So you check the box between both spouses, you get a $22 million exclusion. It's very rare that I'll have clients that are in that world. But again, for Oregon, we don't have portability. You don't have that easy access to just check a box. You need to have your will set up properly. So go make sure you're talking to your attorney. Make sure there's a bypass trust set up in your will so that $2 million is excluded from your estate. Those are kind of some of the main points that I want to raise about the tax laws and things we should be thinking about. A lot of people ask for advice. There's a lot of panic, a lot of fear out there right now. I'll admit, when the panic first hit, I was pretty nervous for a few days. What's going to happen? Is this going to be the bubonic plague? And the fear mongers didn't prove to be true. We obviously have a deadly disease in our society, but it was something my sweetheart pointed out to me. She said, you look at the people who are the most active and the most excited about lockdowns, shutdowns, and economic reduction. Are those the people you trust? And then she follows up by saying, these are the same people that have been calling for shutting down America's economy for a generation over global warming. And in kind of comparing what I was seeing there, it was it was easy enough for a lot of us to tell that the fear and the panic didn't rise to the level of what of reality, perhaps. So this I do have concerns that the government does like to, or certain functionaries in the government do like to use panic and fear to get us to change our lifestyles and to get more control. I've often said the CDC stands for Coalition of Dictators and Cowards, and they're trying to push us in the wrong direction. I know that. Okay, take care, Bill. I know he told me beforehand you have to check out. So I do talk to my clients about having emergency preparedness. Being prepared for emergency is important. They know, I think people know that when people are scared or fearful or are not prepared, they're more easily manipulated to do what the powers want. So having on yourself, I'm not just talking about guns, and maybe that's part of it too, but having an emergency food storage, having a 72-hour kit in a backpack. Each of my kids, we have in our storage, we have a whole line of backpacks that each has water bottles in it, some food supplies in it. And I basically pulled a list off of the Red Cross, and they had a pretty good list, and went through and I ordered on Walmart.com 11 of everything and just lined it all up and had the kids each take a backpack and fill their backpack with all these things. And some of the food items we have to replace every 6 months or so, but as things get as problems happen, we want to make sure that we're prepared so we're not on the fearful side of things. Having water supply, you can buy these filter straws. I think they're great, and you can, if there's a water source, you can access a filter source, purified water. So stuff like this. I do believe that what we saw with the grocery stores being emptied out a year ago, and with the wildfires and the panic we had last fall, I am concerned that this was a dress rehearsal for things to come. So I don't like to be a pessimist, but like the good word says, if you are prepared, you shall not fear. I do have some frustrations when talking politics to people, and I've personally have toned down. It reminds me of the situation where A&W Root Beer, they wanted to compete with McDonald's. McDonald's had released the Quarter Pounder, and they were playing these ads with the music and the lighting and the pictures showing the Quarter Pounder. And Americans were fascinated by the Quarter Pounder. So A&W decides they're going to beat them, and they're going to release the Third Pounder. Nobody bought it because everybody thought the Quarter Pounder was bigger. And that's why it's often so unproductive to talk politics with people. We do have some concerns. Japan, as you know, they saw it in the 80s. I mean, you remember the 80s, right? Japan was everything. I was watching the Karate Kid. I was fascinated by Okinawa. I was trying to buy Sony, everything. This was the Toyota era. Everything was booming in Japan. And they're in 1989, the Nikkei index, it peaked, and that was where everybody wanted their investments. Phil Knight had been a pioneer there, getting his shoes manufactured. But they also had a population decline. It started about 1989, and their population's been on decline ever since. And now, if you want to find out what the youth are into, they're not into karate, they're into Taekwondo. They're not into Sony, they're into Samsung and LG. Hyundai is the car. Where is all this coming from? It's coming from South Korea. So we're seeing shifts in the world economy, but I do think it's important we have a healthy and robust population for our country. When I hear voices and arguments that favor population reduction or overpopulation concerns, I just remember Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, where he was cynical and said, perhaps they better die and decrease the surplus population. As voices of reason, we should be voices that encourage America to have a robust and healthy, thriving population. I also was reading about, there's an author named Alam Bukhari, and he did some studies on how social media has been able to change people's perspectives on things. Facebook is particularly adept at this. They have what's called the feedback loop. And what they'll do is they know apparently the demographics about each one of their users by their searches, what they look for. They can tell if they're Jewish, if they're Church of Jesus Christ, if they're Baptist, and where they go to school, what they do, what they like, dislike, and they create these electronic demographic profiles on everybody, and they can match them up in a way that while a kid is scrolling, if they know this person is on the political right, they can see which articles cause that kid to stop and to click, even if they don't click on it, just to at least read the headline. And thereby they can figure out which articles will make kids in that demographic pause and stop. And so they can move, they've been able to move. And according to quoted people from Facebook in his book, they have been able to move millions of Americans from the political right to the center by using this feedback loop strategy. They're literally manipulating our political views of the world by doing this. And it's startling. But I'm optimistic. There's more tools and research. I think PragerU does a nice job. I think some of the spokespeople for other political ideas are very eloquent and very popular. I mean, when I was a kid, it was basically Rush Limbaugh was it, and may he rest in peace. What a hero to many of us. But we had very little voices to offset what we were hearing in school back then, and there are a lot more now. And so it's just a matter, I think, of leveraging that with our kids. I am noticing, I mean, just as long as I'm making some observations here, I am noticing there was kind of an inflection point between where, I mean, I could see it in my family, my extended family, friends, and people I talk to. About 1981, there is sort of an inflection point of people born before and after 1981, an inflection point of political views. So it is interesting to see how that'll play out. I believe, and I haven't heard this, and I've never done any study on it, and I've never read anything on it, but my own perspective is it's basically people who remember growing up during the Cold War. I grew up watching Red Dawn, for example. Fun movie trivia fact for you movie buffs. Red Dawn was the first PG-13 movie ever released, but and it was quite controversial at the time. But there is that inflection point of those of us who grew up remembering the Cold War and those who didn't, and their political outlook on life. So there's just a lot of misinformation out there. The studies show that if you a majority of Democrats believe, when they poll, that more young people are killed by police than killed in car accidents. And if you believe that's true, you're not just like a little bit off, you're more than 10 to 1 off. That statistic is so lopsided, you're more likely to die in car accidents. But it's the way the news media feeds our information to us that it's created a delusion of misinformation. So we need to, and by the way, that statistic, the survey, it did not change among college educated and high school dropouts. People had the same misperception and same misinformation whether they went to college or not. So you've got parents like me, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback and your thoughts on it, but parents like me who had always thought, got to get my kids to the best college. And now I'm rethinking this, thinking, is college really the best place to form and develop my children's minds to be well-informed and good citizens for our society? I don't know. I think a lot of parents might be in my camp where they're starting to rethink that. But gratefully, there's a lot of alternatives coming out now too. I also wanted to, I mean, the good news is our country continues to be the most religious country in the world, and with the exception of maybe Malta off the south coast of Italy, which is smaller than Lane County. But otherwise, the United States is the most generous in terms of how much we give our time and money to the world. And so I think that speaks well of our country. I see that we actually are winning on a lot of issues. The studies find that the best predictor of who's going to win an election, this particularly applies to the presidential election, is, does this candidate care about people like me? For me, that's not a particularly important issue. I look at how he handles other issues. But when they see a candidate is caring more about them then suddenly that they get the vote. But when it gets down to issues, young people are actually very pro-life. They're anti-abortion. When it comes to guns, I think that the conservatives win on that one. And I think a lot of our work needs to be on the issues where we are winning. And most people believe that that there should be personal accountability. So focusing on the issues where we win and not on the issues, and certainly not taking an extreme position, even if we may have extreme positions, not vocalizing them, I think can help draw younger people into a better position. Charter schools have been skyrocketing. They've increased enrollment by 58% in Oregon over the past year. I know the charter school that my kids go to, the administration, I'm on the board there, but the administration just has completely stopped responding to inquiries. There's just no room, and the influx of requests for the charter school is just too much. And in good news, the Oregon legislature is considering removing the 3% cap. In other words, they've had a cap that only 3% of the students in a school district could be attending a charter school. And most schools didn't have a problem with that cap, but now with the influx, that's become an issue, and they're considering moving that cap, which looks to be promising. I believe our legal system is sound. Our Constitution, I think, is in good shape. We have, Steve mentioned I'd gone to law school. So just to throw out something I thought was interesting from law school is that our legal system is really based on five foundations. You have the tort system, which is intentional torts and negligence. You have a contract system of contract law. You have a property law. You have constitutional law, and you have criminal law, where the government is an actor. And all of these systems that our founders gave to us, much based on the English common law system we inherited, is the program of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And Christ, when he was asked in Matthew chapter 22, what is the great commandment? He cited, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On this commandment hangs all the law and the prophets. And in our system today, the golden rule is fundamental to our legal system. And really, when we're voting, when we're considering ballots and issues, at the core of it should be the golden rule, and not creating dictators and kings and empowering people who are given special privileges. With our system on these five pillars, the golden rule should work just fine. Another reason for optimism I see is the states, I think, are sound. We have 27 state Republicans have governors, and 30 of our states are controlled. The legislatures are controlled by Republicans. So to me, that's really good. And 22 of the states have consolidated power of Republicans, while the Democrats only have 17. So so we're in good shape. Of course, there's 11 states that have divided government: Vermont, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Kansas have a divided government system. But on the state levels, and the reason that's so important, probably more than any other reason, is the states decide the election laws. And so many people are concerned about the elections being lost from here to eternity because the election laws are just favoring illegal immigration and voter ID laws, which is another issue that Republicans went on. Voter ID is popular. But because the states have most of the control on this stuff, then I think we're okay. I'm grateful, even though the Republicans don't control the House and the Senate or the presidency, I believe our judicial branch is doing very well. With I think Trump, for all of his failings, he may have been the best president we've ever had for Supreme Court appointments. And for all the criticisms we have of him, we should be grateful that he did that. We can also be thankful that the mandates that we're having with a lot of the health issues are mostly being kept by the states. So the states are being able to manage a lot of it. I realize the transportation, airports, that federal areas, that those mask mandates are being upheld. But really, most of the health issues are being managed at the state levels, and I think that's a good thing. So this is my point is, I'm optimistic about the future. I think our tax system has a lot of opportunities and a lot of pitfalls in it, and our political system, I believe, is sound. I know we've had some dark times, but I think working together with groups like Rubicon, and I just enjoy being with you here, because it gives me hope and optimism that there are people who will stand for values despite the sometimes torrential onslaught of Lane County. So that's my little speech, Steve. That's all I have for you. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That was really great. It was way more than just taxes. And I appreciate that, because it's rare that we hear what all is working and right about our country and about our society. One of the things that troubles me, and I really don't understand how to fix it, is that the news media is, if you count the stories where the Chicken Little principle is in effect of the sky is falling, it's almost every story on national news. And yet, and I don't even watch the national news anymore. I look at headlines on the internet because it's depressing. It is supremely depressing. And I think that's the object of the game, is to depress everybody and to make everybody feel like we're doomed, and we're not. How do we fight this?
So from my little perspective, and it really struck a chord with me, because we run an Airbnb. That little building down there isn't my house. It's our Airbnb, and we have Sling TV there, and I'm on the subscription. So as soon as I pull up my Sling TV, I see what was recently watched, and almost universally people are watching CNN down there, and it's as though that's the source of all wisdom and knowledge. They did a study, and they asked people if they what % of people would be hospitalized if they caught the coronavirus. 41% of Democrats say that over half the people who catch coronavirus are hospitalized. The real answer is somewhere between 1% and 5%, right? But this is sort of the misinformation, the panic, and the deluge of bad information that's out there. And a lot of it's on us. I feel like I have a responsibility to my kids, and just to be more bold. We're in an era where we have to find ways to use good humor, like this club does, but also with the humor and interest, just share truth. And as long as we're committed to truth and we're willing to speak out, I think it works. But I share your concern. I think the mainstream news media has completely abrogated any responsibility to objectivity towards agendas that are not healthy for our country.
Does anybody else have a comment or question for Joseph?
This is Jerry. We have a full-blown Marxist revolution happening in this country, and we better recognize what it is and be ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is Darlene. You mentioned you thought the states were in a good position regarding the election laws, but there is a bill there, HR 1, that wants to totally revamp our election laws, and it seems like that would supersede the state laws. I don't think it's constitutional, but what do you know about HR 1?
Not much. I've seen the buzz though about the election laws. I do believe that the public opinion is on the side of fair elections, and I know we hear a lot of, it's racist to demand voter ID, but that's not the sentiment in the country. The polling shows that people don't believe voter ID laws are racist. People do want free and fair elections, and this may be a thing that goes to the Supreme Court. And I do believe in what do you call it, serendipity, or it's sort of there's like a higher meaning in things. And to be totally candid, when I heard that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, shortly before the election, one of the first things I thought was, this is a sign that that Joe Biden will win the election, because we need Ginsburg replaced. I think the Lord's hand was. I know that God is very aware of everything going on in our country, and if cases like this go to the Supreme Court, I believe we have a sound judicial system at the Supreme Court, at least.
This is John Quilter, and you mentioned that the charter schools are extremely full and not taking any more people. But are you aware of a Oregon Senate Bill 658 that would create educational savings accounts that would send some state money directly to parents to be used in private schools for tuition? Whether they be religious schools or other types of private schools, that would mitigate the expense of private schools and also provide some degree of competition to the public school system?
I'm not familiar with that one. I know, like, the state of Oregon, they give, the gross about $10,000 per student to the charter schools, and then the local district, that they're affiliated, whether it's 4J or Southland. I don't know who'd want to be affiliated with 4J for a charter, but Southland School District is very popular. They'll take 20% of that off the top, and there's some other fees. So the charter schools are very well funded. They're a great environment for the most part. In our charter school, for example, in order to continue to get our government funding, we have devotion, what do you call them? The assemblies, in the local church. But at the church, they have to cover all the crosses, hide all the Bibles and all the hymnals, so that there's no religious influence in the school. And I guess that's, I'm not a fan of it. I know the elders of the church have had some conflict with the charter school over that, but we have to say, look, it's not our decision. We're all Christians on the board, at least. But the charter schools are well funded. Our schools in Oregon are well funded. And if they're going to send money to to parents to go to private schools, so be it. That's a tough one, because you don't want the government getting too involved, but you do know that we're paying our taxes for the education system. So give the parents their money back. That's fine. I think we're in a better situation when we earmark taxes. In other words, typically gas taxes should go to pay for roads. It's tied there. The real estate taxes should go to pay for schools, because presumably if you buy a larger home, you've got more kids in there, so you're more responsible for the school system. So I believe having an accountability or a direct connection is better. Unfortunately, they don't keep it as strict as they should, and we have a general fund in Oregon that has very little transparency and makes it harder.
Does anybody else? We've got time for one more question, and anybody else got anything they'd like to talk to Joseph about?
Not a question, Steve, but
Okay.
on HR 1, just so you know, Senator Joe Manchin's all but shot that down on the Senate side, so that's not going anywhere. And I think we all understand Joe Manchin's in the complete catbird seat. He's the most powerful man in Washington, D.C. right now as we speak. There is more powerful than the president, who, by the way, the chief of staff is actually the president. I hope people understand that. It's not Joe. And I think most people back in DC already understand that as well. But so Manchin's already shot it down in the Senate. And so there's not going to be an HR 1. And take a look at redistricting and what's going on around the country. This is the likelihood that's going to happen, that the Republicans will take back control of the House based on redistricting, and because of how many seats are being lost in the liberal states. And by the way, I just got back from Texas with my kids down there, and there's not a Marxist revolution down there at all. I just thought I'd let you know. 100% open. You can wear a mask if you want, and that's great. And I respect people who do. All businesses are 100% open. There's no 25%, 50%, 75%, all open. And gas has risen to $2.39 a gallon. darn it. That was just awful. And so anyway, so our state unfortunately has gone that route, but boy, there's so many other states in this country that are not and are right now are flourishing, and Florida and Texas being two of them. So anyway, just a commentary, but thank you for your time, Joseph. It was great, especially on the tax provisions that are happening, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time, but I want to thank Joseph and Sid for ending this whole thing on an upbeat note and having the whole meeting be an upbeat meeting. And because every once in a while, it's kind of nice to be hit with good news instead of the constant bombardment that we do get.